Experts say the signs are not good. Numbers show they're definitely not good. Exports have fallen, imports have dropped. Debt levels are high, and the government's solution to this crisis is ideology. They're teaching the Xi Jinping thought to China's bankers. Meanwhile, the rest of the world is bracing for a food crisis. Climate change and conflict have hit supplies. Major producers like India and China are registering lower output. Prices are rising the world over. In Europe, Poland and Lithuania are bracing for conflict. Wagner forces are conducting drills on their border. The Taliban want to unleash suicide bombers to settle a water dispute. India will investigate the mysterious Havana Syndrome. America wants to celebrate India's Independence Day as National Day of Celebration. And air pollution is making antibiotics useless. What does it mean and why should you care? We'll discuss all of that. The headlines first. Niger's coup leaders remain defiant. They name Ali Mehman Zen as their new prime minister. He previously served as the finance minister. A US diplomat meets with the coup leaders but makes no headway. Deposed President Mohamed Bazoum is still in detention. Pakistan's government reaches consensus on who will be the caretaker prime minister, but the name is being kept under wraps. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif is expected to meet the National Assembly opposition leader to finalize the name. There is just one day left before the dissolution of the National Assembly of Pakistan. Beijing drafts rules for use of facial recognition data. Firms must get consent before collecting personal information, but the rules don't apply to some bodies. The regulations will come into effect from September. China is among the most surveilled countries in the world. Typhoon Khanun brings heavy rains to Japan again. Hundreds of flights cancelled, bullet trains partially suspended. Last week, the storm battered Okinawa, killing at least 2 people and injuring more than 100. Typhoon Khanun is headed for South Korea next. And the Amazon summit begins in Brazil. 8 South American countries are attending the 2-day summit. The focus is on finding solutions to save the damaged Amazon, the world's largest rainforest. It is the first summit in 14 years for the 8-nation group that shares the Amazon basin. The Chinese economy is sick. Everything that can go wrong is going wrong. Growth has slumped, millions are unemployed, investment is sluggish, and local governments are saddled with debt. These are symptoms of a chronic disease. Experts have a name for it. They're calling it an economic long COVID. An economic long COVID. It's a telling assessment, and our lead story tonight, we start with the latest data on trade. China's exports have dropped. It's the biggest drop in 3 years. Exports have fallen by 14.5% compared to the numbers from July 2022. And this is extremely worrying for Beijing because exports are the growth drivers of China. Exports propel their economy. They made China an economic powerhouse, and now they have slumped. What's worse, this is not a one-off. In the past 3 months, China's exports have steadily declined. In the past 7 months, exports have dropped by 5%. Why do you think that's happening? Why are China's exports shrinking? The world wants to decouple with China. They want to reduce dependence on China. But this drop in exports is not because of that. It has nothing to do with decoupling. The problem here is more fundamental in nature. There is a serious drop in demand. The global economy is slowing down. The cost of living is rising. High inflation is hurting everyone. So the general approach is to save money. People all over the world are buying less. And that means fewer orders for Chinese factories. For 4 straight months now, factory activity has been shrinking in China. The workers have fewer orders to process. Factories are churning out fewer goods. China's biggest buyers are placing smaller orders. The United States, for instance, it is a big market for China. But Chinese exports to America fell by more than 23% this year. The European Union is another major buyer. Their orders to China fell by over 20%. And this is the general trajectory. And it's throwing Beijing off balance. 2023 was supposed to be the year of recovery for them. And China was banking on exports to drive this recovery, but that's not happening anymore. And that's not the only problem. There is another vulnerability. China's import orders are also falling. Let me take you back to the latest trade data. There is a fall of more than 12% in imports. A 12% fall in imports. Why is this important? Because import numbers are a reflection of China's economic health. They reveal the inside story. They show the level of consumer demand. Are people in China spending money? These numbers show they're not. A fall in imports signals a dip in spending. Beijing knows that. In the month of July, they introduced a new plan. It was supposed to boost spending. Local officials were asked to reach out to the masses and do what? Encourage residents to refurbish their homes. They had plans to provide better credit facilities. This was supposed to boost spending in household items. But it hasn't really helped. People are not spending as much money as the state would like them to. They're keeping their savings in banks. Look at some numbers from the month of January. This is an assessment on Chinese banks on their liquidity. How much cash do they have in deposits? Trillions of dollars. Deposits were higher than loans. The gap between loans and deposits was at its highest since 1997. And this is a telling statistic. It reveals two things. One, the people are worried. They're keeping their savings in banks. They feel they'll have to dip into those savings at some point. The second takeaway is about the banks themselves. They have large deposits. They would like to give out loans to people, but people don't want to take any more loans. Chinese households already have a high level of debt. They're already heavily indebted. By June, they owed more than $5 trillion in debt. This was in the form of mortgage loans, consumer goods loans, credit card debt, private borrowings, business loans. $5 trillion. So households don't have the appetite for more debt, and that's bad business for banks. What is Beijing doing about these issues? They're re-educating their bankers, not in economics or banking, but in the Xi Jinping thought. You heard that right? Instead of fixing this economic mess, Chinese officials are hosting lectures. They're teaching bankers about the Xi Jinping thought. And what is that? It's a set of policies and ideas espoused by the Chinese president. In 2018, these were added to the Chinese constitution. So bankers are being lectured on ideology, on how to be loyal to the Communist Party and to the president. What they need right now is policy intervention, not propaganda. Two engines of their economy have failed. Exports are down, imports have fallen. Throwing the red book at this problem will not help. Something strange happened last week. The United Nations Security Council held a special meeting. It wasn't about Russia's war. It wasn't about the coup in Niger. It wasn't about any conflict. This meeting was about food security. Now, when the Security Council discusses food, you know it's a big problem. Just how big? Let me tell you. Around 780 million people in the world are hungry. 780 million are hungry. That's 1 in 10 people. They don't know where the next meal is coming from. Around 345 million people are facing acute hunger. That's borderline starvation. This number has doubled since 2020. And of these people, around 49 million are on the brink of famine. These are unprecedented levels. The World Food Programme was set up in 1963. Since then, global hunger has never been this high. So why now? Well, one reason is the population. When overall population rises, so does the hungry population. But that alone is not causing this. Two man-made problems are fueling this crisis: conflict and climate change. Around 70% of the hungry population lives in regions affected by war, places like Yemen, Congo, Chad, Niger. It's a fact of life. Where there is war, there is hunger. And the war in Ukraine is making things worse. Ukraine makes up around 10% of global wheat exports, plus around 15% of corn exports. Most of this went to the developing world, but it's not going there anymore. Last month, Russia withdrew from the Black Sea grain deal. They've stopped Ukraine from exporting food, and this is the result: a resurgent food crisis. Wheat prices are up nearly 10%. Millions of tons of wheat are stuck in Ukraine. Think about how absurd that is. 780 million people are hungry, yet wheat is just rotting away because of war. That's one problem. The second cause is climate change. 2023 has seen some of the worst heat waves. Last month, July, was the hottest on record. This erratic weather is affecting output. Wheat yield is expected to fall around 20% in the next 2 decades and around 40% by 2080. So our population is rising, but our food production is falling. Obviously, that is bad news. These two factors have forced countries to take drastic calls. India, for example, we've banned the export of two important grains, wheat and non-basmati white rice. Both decisions were crucial. India makes up around 40% of global rice exports. That's around 22 million tons. A big chunk of that is non-basmati white rice. Imagine that supply disappearing overnight. The effects are already visible. Rice prices are up almost 20% compared to January. It's the highest level since 2011. So here's the bottom line. Climate change is reducing our output. War is affecting our supply lines. If you add these two, what do you get? A global food crisis, that's what you get. If you produce food, you can escape this somehow. Like India or the United States, you can control your exports and keep more to yourself. But that's a luxury. More than 130 countries are net importers of food, meaning they buy more than they sell. These countries are at the mercy of global factors. When Russia pulls out of the grain deal, these countries are helpless. Same when India bans rice exports, or when Ukrainian grain depots are destroyed. And don't think this is temporary. The effects of today's hunger will be felt forever through malnutrition, through stunted growth, through reduced immunity. So the solution cannot be slow or delayed. It must come now. And how will that happen? In an ideal world, Putin will have a change of heart. World leaders will pump trillions into climate action. But let's face it, neither is going to happen. Going forward, climate change will be the biggest villain. Just look at what's happening in China. There are devastating floods in the country's northeast. This region is often called China's granary, but right now it is underwater. Thousands of hectares of crops have been destroyed. The wheat harvest is down 1%. It is the first time in 7 years that China's summer output is down, and this is really bad news. China is the world's largest producer of rice and wheat, but all of it is consumed at home. In fact, even the local production is not enough. China ends up importing food anyway. It is a net importer of food items. The good news is Beijing has the means. They have the money to buy food from abroad, but many countries in Africa and Asia do not have that luxury. They don't just need food, they need affordable food. It's one area where the world is going backwards. We actually made some great progress in the last 50 years. In 1970, around 33% of people in developing countries were hungry. By 2015, this number was down to 12%, from 33 to 12%. How did we achieve that? Through consistent investment. But those gains have been eroded in the last 3 years. Global hunger has risen 119%, 119% since the pandemic. How do we correct this? By investing more money. In this case, throwing money at the problem is important. Whether it's climate action or buying food grains or investing in new technology, we need that money. We're not investing enough money. Last year, the United Nations raised around $14 billion to feed the hungry. It was an all-time record, 14 million. But guess how much the target was? 40 billion. 40. I know it's a lot, but if governments want to, they can spare this money. If you take out 5% of America's military budget, you can end hunger for 1 year, just 5%. Also, oil companies, they made $100 billion in profits in the first quarter of 2023. That's $100 billion in 3 months. So don't think money is not available. It's all about priorities. Now let's tell you about an old mystery that is back in the headlines. It is called the Havana Syndrome. We live in a world full of mysterious phenomena, the Bermuda Triangle, the Loch Ness Monster. They capture the public imagination, but nothing beats the Havana Syndrome. It has diplomatic intrigue and a dash of paranoia. And what exactly is it? Well, the term Havana Syndrome was first coined in 2016. Havana as in the capital of Cuba. The first case was detected there, hence the Havana Syndrome. It was used to describe a series of unexplained health incidents. They started at the American Embassy in Cuba. Now, the symptoms are no laughing matter, even though they sound like a classic hangover, headache, dizziness, and some cognitive issues. The embassy staff said they heard strange sounds. They experienced weird sensations, all while sitting in their hotel rooms. And how did it happen? Well, that is the big mystery. No one knows. Since 2016, there have been 200 cases of the Havana Syndrome. 200 cases. It has been reported in Australia, Colombia, Russia, Georgia, Kyrgyzstan, Poland, Serbia, Taiwan, China, Uzbekistan, even here in India. In 2021, the US Vice President Kamala Harris was visiting Vietnam. She was about to fly to Hanoi, but her flight got delayed. Do you know why? Because an American official in Vietnam reported the symptoms. So basically, it has been detected all over the world. If you watch sci-fi movies, you may have noticed how aliens only attack America. This is diplomacy's version of it. The Havana Syndrome only affects US diplomats and their families. No one else is harmed. So obviously, there's a lot of questions around it. Is it a genuine health concern, or is it just overthinking fueled by spy movies? Either way, the Havana Syndrome has the world in its grips, and now India is set to investigate it. It began with a petition in the Karnataka High Court. The petition was filed by a Bengaluru resident. It called for an inquiry into the syndrome in India. And the central government has responded to this. They have in fact agreed to investigate the matter. And here's something you must know. Till date, India has seen only one case of the Havana Syndrome. It was in 2021. The victim again was a US officer in New Delhi. He was part of CI Director William Burns's delegation. He's said to have experienced some weird symptoms, like the ones I described earlier. The officer even had to get some medical treatment, so it must have been serious. But the real intrigue lies in the alleged cause. Since the Havana Syndrome is only affecting US personnel, Washington jumped into action quickly. It looked at all the probable causes: secret weapons, psychological illness, nerve agents, enemy states. They explored all of it. At one point, this was a national security priority for the US. They blamed foreign powers. But soon that theory fizzled out. Do you know why? Because they had no evidence. It's been 7 years. They still have no evidence. The truth is still not out. The closest the US has come to an answer is microwave radiation. And even then, there is no evidence to back it. It almost sounds like a sci-fi movie where villains harness the power of sound to attack unsuspecting diplomats. Forget laser beams and invisible cars. The true weapon is the humble sound. And while we can make jokes about it, for the CIA, the Havana Syndrome is a very serious matter. They may not have found a reason yet, but it's not stopped them from compensating the victims. In 2021, US lawmakers passed a legislation. It was aimed at supporting victims of the syndrome. President Biden signed it into law the very same year. It's called the Havana Act in short, but the full form is a mouthful, and I will read it out for you. This is what it's called: the Helping American Victims Afflicted by Neurological Attacks Act, aka the Havana Act. Clearly, America spent more time on coining the acronym than probing the cause, but each victim with confirmed injuries is eligible to get, and listen to this, $180,000. It's a lot of money, especially for something that cannot even be proven. Now, India wants to investigate it and wants to find out more about this mysterious ailment. Is this an ailment really, or a case of cloak and dagger espionage? We say good luck. We also say reality is sometimes stranger than fiction. Vantage continues after a short break.
He wants to speak only when the Prime Minister is present.
So Indian media doesn't cease to surprise me, and I'll tell you why. And I will also first respond to the frivolous, flawed arguments made for almost 2 minutes 34 seconds by the BJP spokesperson. The reality is that a state of the Indian Union has been on fire for the last 97 days. The reality is that a horrific video put forward the plight of Manipur, and it took that horrific video and 78 days for an elected Prime Minister to break his silence, and he spoke for only 36 seconds before indulging in whataboutery. The reality is that from the Women and Child Development Minister to the Women Commission of India, the National Commission for Women in India, they did nothing before the horrific video did not come to light. The reality also is that we tried through various ways to make the Prime Minister speak, because the Prime Minister is not just another MP or not just another minister. He is the elected Prime Minister.
And speaking of secrets, what is on Vladimir Putin's mind? Will the conflict in Ukraine spill over? We've been asking this question since the war began last year, and we have good reason to keep asking it. Europe is living in fear. The Wagner forces are in Belarus. Today they began fresh drills. Do you know where? Wagner drills are happening near the border with Poland and Lithuania. So leaders of both these countries are worried. They've increased border security and they say they're bracing for more Russian provocations. So is a fresh escalation on the cards? Our next report explores.
When the Wagner forces left Russia for Belarus, many thought it was a retirement posting, but it wasn't. Far from being irrelevant, these Russian mercenaries are creating new security challenges for the region. The new provocation are drills near Poland and Lithuania. The exercise began on Monday. They're happening here in the Grodno region of Belarus. The Polish-Lithuanian border falls next to it. The Wagner forces showed up with some serious firepower. They're training with military drones, tanks and motorized rifle units. The defense forces of Belarus are participating too. Minsk says the Wagner forces are sharing their learnings from the war in Ukraine. But why train so close to NATO's borders? The reason could be this is a sparsely populated stretch of land. It's called the Suwalki Gap. It's Polish territory and NATO's biggest vulnerability. Military experts say Russia could exploit it. This area runs along the border where Wagner troops are conducting drills. It links at least 3 Baltic states: Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia. There are fears that Russia might try to seize the Suwalki Gap, turn it into a potential flashpoint, and cut off 3 Baltic states from Poland and other NATO members. Warsaw recognizes the risk. Today, the Polish Prime Minister visited the Suwalki Gap. He was accompanied by the Lithuanian President. Poland feels Wagner wants to destabilize NATO's eastern flank.
This is what provocation is about. This is what intrigue and plotting on the part of Putin and Lukashenko is about. And this is what the operational activities on their side are about. In order to destabilize, in order to create unrest, chaos, uncertainty, and at the same time, to show the weakness of NATO's eastern flank to all of our partners in NATO.
Putin's loyal ally Lukashenko doesn't feel that way. He believes the drills are a necessity to secure Belarus and to keep Western powers in check. Last week, he mocked Warsaw.
I heard recently that Poland went berserk. It alleged that some detachment is coming here with as many as 100 people. No Wagner detachments of 100 people moved here. And if they did, it was to only transfer their military experience to Belarusian brigades concentrated in Brest and Grodno.
Lukashenko was referring to the latest Polish developments. Poland has rushed more troops to its eastern borders. This was after a chopper incident. Last week, Warsaw claimed Belarus sent military helicopters to its airspace. Minsk denied the allegation. There are growing concerns the situation might escalate. Already, the war in Ukraine is intensifying. Today, 2 Russian missiles hit the eastern city of Pokrovsk. The target was a residential complex. The missiles completely destroyed the buildings and there were multiple casualties. Putin seems to be bracing for a serious escalation. Reports say he's beefing up the Russian National Guard. They'll be equipped with heavy weaponry like artillery and attack helicopters. Is he preparing for a wider conflict? Only the Russian president knows the answer.
Tensions are also rising in the Gulf. The United States has deployed soldiers to the region, around 3,000 soldiers to be precise. They arrived on board 2 warships on Sunday, the USS Bataan and the USS Carter Hall. One is an amphibious assault ship, the other is used for dock landing. Both vessels sailed into the Red Sea on Sunday. But what are they doing there? Countering Iranian aggression. Iran has been capturing oil tankers in the Gulf. How many? Around 20 in the last 2 years, according to Washington. So the US and its allies are worried. Oil prices are already high. The last thing they want is a tanker seizure. So what did Joe Biden do? He flexed his military muscles. He sent thousands of soldiers and multiple fighter jets to the region. Reports say the plan is to escort commercial tankers. How does that work? You deploy US Marines or soldiers on these ships. You raise the stakes for Iran. If they seize or attack these tankers, they could hurt American troops or worse, kill them. So the hope is that the escort will deter Tehran. And what is Tehran saying? Their foreign minister says the deployment is unnecessary and the Gulf nations can protect themselves.
The US military presence in the region has never been meant for maintaining security. Instead, their aim has always been to exacerbate insecurity and instability. Therefore, Iran's position is very clear. We believe in Gulf countries' ability to provide security for themselves and to design a collective security pattern without the presence of foreign troops.
Iran is not backing down. In fact, they're expanding their arsenal. The Iranian Navy has been equipped with a new missile. It's called the Abu Mahdi. It has a range of 1,000 kilometers. The latest showdown has massive implications, both for the US and for the rest of the world. The region we are talking about is this, the Strait of Hormuz. It is 39 kilometers long. It is a choke point between the Gulf of Oman and the Persian Gulf. And why is it important? Because 20% of the world's oil passes through this strait. 20%. If there is fighting in Hormuz, all of us will feel the pinch. Iran knows this. They capture oil tankers for two reasons. One is tit for tat. The US often captures tankers containing sanctioned Iranian oil. When that happens, Tehran responds. The second reason is to put political pressure. We know how important oil prices are. Iran weaponizes this to gain concessions. They're doing that. Are they doing that now is the question. It's certainly a possibility. There was talk of an intermediate nuclear deal between Iran and the US. Maybe Tehran is angling for better terms. And if they are, it is the perfect time to do this. America's attention and resources are spread thin. They have a war in Eastern Europe. You have China knocking on Taiwan's doors. So Joe Biden has a lot on his plate. Plus, the American public is tired of West Asian wars. The US military largely pulled out of the region under Donald Trump. Their last carrier left West Asia in November 2020. The last Marine unit was pulled out in 2021. So it was the right time to test Biden's resolve. Would he re-enter the region or not? Well, this time he's decided to order massive deployments. It's definitely a signal of intent. You don't deploy 3,000 soldiers and fighter jets if you're half-hearted. Just one question though. Why? Biden has a re-election next year. Why would he risk being dragged into West Asia again? Reports say his allies want him to do this. Saudi Arabia and the UAE have been cozying up to China. Biden needs to offer them something that China cannot, and that something is security. Safe passage for oil tankers. And where does that leave West Asia? In a more tense situation, certainly. The more deployments you have, the higher the risk of conflict. That's what happened in the 1980s, remember? Iran and the US were engaged in a tanker war. In 1988, the US attacked Iranian oil rigs. They also sank multiple ships. It was the largest US naval battle since the Second World War. My point is very simple. Risks are higher, but China and Russia will be enjoying this. More attention in West Asia means less attention in the Pacific or in Eastern Europe. It's something Joe Biden should be wary of. This is a place where starting a war is pretty easy, but ending one is nearly impossible. He's put thousands of soldiers and weapons in an old flashpoint. What he does next will be crucial. US-Iran relations going downhill is quite standard. On the other hand, American ties with a different Asian nation are on the rise. We're talking about India. Washington has been quite keen to solidify this friendship with New Delhi. Both the blue and the red halves of Washington, both Democrats and Republicans, are part of a delegation coming to India. They're coming for India's Independence Day, the 15th of August. And back in the US, the other members of Congress may celebrate it too. American lawmakers want to declare August 15 a national day of celebration in the US. This is to celebrate the world's two largest democracies. The resolution has been introduced in the US House of Representatives. It may not pass this year though, as August 15th is almost upon us, but it shows the deepening of the friendship between India and America. Here's a report.
A a week from now, India will celebrate its Independence Day. As usual, there'll be a speech given by the Prime Minister. Prime Minister Narendra Modi will deliver his speech from the ramparts of the iconic Red Fort in New Delhi. And many will gather there to celebrate the day of modern India's birth. Among those in attendance will be a few Americans, a delegation of US members of Congress. The group will be led by Ro Khanna and Michael Waltz, a Democrat and a Republican. These two are the co-chairs of the US Congressional Caucus on India and Indian Americans. It's a bipartisan group tasked with building on the good ties the US shares with India. Khanna and Waltz have decided to commemorate the friendship by coming to India to celebrate the country's Independence Day. They'll be joined by Representatives Deborah Ross, Kat Kamak, Jasmine Crockett, Rich McCormick, Ed Case and Sri Thanedar. So, 8 members of Congress in total will attend the celebrations, 5 Democrats and 3 Republicans, which shows bipartisanship in an increasingly divided America. It seems one thing both Republicans and Democrats still agree on is India. The need for the world's oldest democracy to foster ever better ties with the world's largest democracy. If you look at India-US ties in the last few years, they've been improving steadily. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi was in the US recently. He addressed the US Congress. This was at the invitation of US President Joe Biden.
The chemistry in our relations is effortless.
The Indian Prime Minister had been there 6 times before that, during both the Trump and Obama years. It seems that no matter which party is in power, India gets a call. There are a number of reasons for this, like the looming threat of China. Khanna and Waltz released a statement where they highlighted this. They said, "We firmly believe that the US-India relationship will shape the 21st century and play a crucial role in upholding multipolarity in Asia while preventing the dominance of any single power such as China." So, containing China is one reason for the India-US friendship. But another big factor is the Indian diaspora. Indian Americans have taken on the mantle of model minority. They've risen through the ranks in every field, left a mark in business and politics and everything in between. Representative Ro Khanna himself is a good example. He's represented California's 17th district since 2017. The US delegation also has another Indian American member we should talk about, Sri Thanedar. He's a House representative from the state of Michigan. Thanedar grew up in India, and it seems his ties to the country are as strong as ever. He recently introduced a resolution in the US House, one which seeks to designate August 15th as a day of celebration in the US. Thanedar says it should be a national day of celebration of the world's 2 largest democracies. The resolution also seeks to acknowledge the contributions of Americans of Indian descent to society in the US, and expresses the belief that the strong partnership between the United States and India, rooted in shared democratic values, will continue to advance global democracy and foster peace, stability, and prosperity for all nations. It seems like an earnest attempt to bring the countries even closer. And it shows how the Indian diaspora plays a pivotal role in the good ties that India and the US share.
When I say Andaman and Nicobar Islands, what comes to mind? If you're an Indian, I can guess. A remote chain of islands, beautiful beaches, maybe even water sports. But what about marine warfare? Just last week, a Japanese destroyer visited Port Blair. That's the capital of Andaman and Nicobar. The military leaders held talks. The sailors, meanwhile, had a nice time of football and some yoga. Last month, another warship was in town, the French frigate Lorraine. The vessel made a port call at Port Blair, which begs the question, why the sudden interest in Andaman and Nicobar? To understand that, we must look at the geography. Andaman and Nicobar is an archipelago. It has 572 islands. The northernmost is close to Myanmar. The southernmost is close to Indonesia. It straddles two important oceans, the Indian Ocean and the Pacific. It is also close to a very important choke point, the Malacca Strait. This strip of water between Malaysia and Indonesia, this is the Malacca Strait. And why is it important? Because ships heading to China pass through here. Most of them carry oil. Around 80% of China's oil imports go via Malacca. You strangle Malacca, you strangle China. That's how it works. Which is why Andaman and Nicobar is so important. It is almost 1,200 kilometers away from mainland India, but that distance is the biggest advantage. From Andaman, you can keep tabs on Malacca. You can project military power. You can also run supply and reconnaissance missions. So the strategic value is huge. Why then did India never use it? Because it was never really necessary. China's Indian Ocean ambitions emerged in the last decade. They began sending fishing boats, patrols and submarines. In 2016, China built a military base in Djibouti. That's on the other side of the Indian Ocean, in the Horn of Africa. The next year, in 2017, they got the Hambantota port in Sri Lanka. Suddenly, China was all around us. That's when New Delhi began realizing the potential of Andaman and Nicobar. So what are they doing about it? The first priority is to improve the infrastructure. The Navy has an air station on this island called Campbell Bay. It has a 3,500 feet long runway. It is now being upgraded to 10,000 feet. You can't operate bigger planes without long runways. In January, Defense Minister Rajnath Singh was at this air station. He reviewed the upgrade progress. A second runway is also being built, another 10,000 feet one in the southern islands. These new runways will be crucial to hosting military planes. In 2020, a US aircraft landed there for refueling, a surveillance plane called P-8 Poseidon. It was the first such mission on Andaman and Nicobar. Some Indian assets are also deployed there, like the Sukhoi fighter jets and the Jaguar planes. In many ways, Andaman is perfect for the job. It is the only place in India with a joint command. And what does that mean? All three services of Indian military operate under a single leadership there. The Army, the Navy, the Air Force. All these assets report to a single command. In the mainland, that's not the case. Each service reports to its own leadership. Experts say joint commands are better in the long run. There is more synergy, more clarity. Andaman and Nicobar already has that. This year, a major joint military exercise was held there. It involved the Army, the Navy, the Air Force and the Coast Guard. So the thought process is right, and it's not just military investments. Civilian infrastructure is also getting a boost. The government says it has invested 30,000 crore rupees in the last decade in Andaman and Nicobar. The plan is to invest another 10,000 crores. A transshipment hub, an international airport, a solar power plant are all in the works. Other countries are also investing, by the way. Japan, for example, is funding a power project. Quick side note, Tokyo actually captured Andaman and Nicobar in 1942. This was during the Second World War. They realized the strategic importance even then, 1942. Almost 80 years later, the world is also realizing the same thing. They're calling Andaman and Nicobar an unsinkable carrier, a formidable outpost to counter China. But words alone are not enough. The islands need major military upgrades to serve such a purpose. More military assets, more surveillance tech, more infrastructure. If not, it's a waste of strategic value. And now let's move from sound military strategies to absolutely absurd ones. The Taliban are amassing troops at the Afghanistan-Iran border. This comes amid heightened tensions between the two nations. The cause is a water dispute. The unusually high temperatures caused by global warming have led to water issues in both these countries, Afghanistan and Iran, and they're quarreling over water sharing. The countries have already traded barbs, even seen a few border skirmishes, but now things seem to be escalating. The Taliban have sent thousands of fighters to the border, and reports say there are hundreds of suicide bombers with them. Yes, suicide bombers. Clearly, old habits die hard, but seriously, what are the warlords in Kabul thinking? A water dispute requires negotiation and diplomacy to solve, not suicide vests. How can they expect to be taken seriously if their go-to strategy is to blow up both sides? Our next report brings you more details.
The Taliban are at it again, preparing their suicide bombers for a mission. But this mission is a bit unusual. It isn't just about causing terror, it's also about resolving a water dispute. Yes, all of us in the rest of the world must have got it backwards. We resolve water disputes by sending our diplomats to the field. We spend years chalking out water treaties, making sure all parties sit at the table and work out a deal that benefits everyone. It seems the Taliban would rather just blow up the negotiating table and their fighters along with it. Welcome to the wild world of suicide bomber diplomacy. Let's first look at how we got here. This is the Afghanistan-Iran border region. This river passes through it. It's called the Helmand in Afghanistan and the Hirmand in Iran. It comes from the Hindu Kush mountains in Afghanistan and supplies water to the Sistan and Balochistan regions of Iran. These are drought-prone areas that depend on the river's water. But Iran says it hasn't been getting its fair share. It accuses Afghanistan of hoarding the river's waters, and tensions have been high because of this water dispute. Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi was in Sistan and Balochistan in May. He threatened the Taliban with retribution if water wasn't shared as previously agreed. Tehran demands that the Taliban respect a water-sharing treaty from 1973. The treaty guarantees Iran a share of the river's water, and it says this year it has only received 4% of the promised amount. That's why Iran is furious. The Taliban say that the treaty doesn't apply during drought years, which is true. The treaty only guarantees water during a normal water year. It's an old treaty. Normal is an ambiguous term. The logical thing to do would be to send negotiators to iron out a clearer deal. But, as you know, logic isn't the Taliban's strong suit. When Raisi made his statement, the Taliban mocked him. A prominent Taliban official offered a gift of a 20-litre water container in response and told Raisi to stop issuing ultimatums. The Taliban said that Iran is causing regional instability by making threats. This obviously didn't go down well with the Iranians. A week after this happened, a border skirmish took place. 2 Iranian guards and 1 Taliban member died. All this happened between mid-May and June. While all this empty bravado was on display, there was some proper diplomacy taking place as well. Afghanistan had completed a dam on the Helmand River in 2021. There's a water reservoir behind it, not too far from the border with Iran. In June, the Taliban had agreed to let an Iranian technical team visit the dam. Then, in early July, Iran said there had been no progress. Then late last month, Iran's Ministry of Foreign Affairs made another statement. It said it had reached a preliminary agreement with the Taliban on water sharing, but it didn't give any details. And now we have troops gathering at the border, which begs the question, what is going on? Water sharing is complex, but it doesn't call for war. And it certainly doesn't call for suicide bombers at the borders. Are the bombers a pressure tactic by the Taliban? A way to strong-arm Tehran into agreeing to whatever has been discussed? Or is it just that the Taliban know no other way? This is a violent insurgent movement that has been fighting for decades. And now that they've taken over, they need to govern. But of course, the Taliban are better at gunslinging than governance. In the case of this water dispute, it seems the Taliban prefer death by suicide bomb to diplomacy, which only goes to show the warlords in Kabul are in over their heads.
And before I begin my last story, let me ask you, have you ever gotten food poisoning? What about a skin infection or bacterial pneumonia? And trust me, this is not an uncomfortable doctor's appointment. I'm simply mentioning commonly occurring bacterial infections. Chances are you've caught one at least once in your life. And what happened next? If a standard drill was followed, doctors probably prescribed antibiotics. After all, antibiotics are life-saving drugs. But what if I told you soon these drugs could stop working? They won't help. Some doctors say it's almost inevitable. And there's a surprising reason why. It's the air you breathe. Polluted air is raising antibiotic resistance among people, no matter their age, no matter where they live. A new global study is out. It recorded data from 166 countries. It says antibiotics are under threat due to air pollution across the world. More germs like bacteria, are winning the fight. They're defeating the medicines designed to kill them. So antibiotic resistance is on the rise, meaning a wide range of new problems. Infections could go untreated. Even minor injuries could become life-threatening. Many surgeries will not happen because antibiotics may not be able to prevent later infections. The quality of air has always been linked to antibiotic resistance, in fact. It wasn't a cause for alarm, though. People usually resist antibiotics due to misuse or overuse. But now air pollution is getting worse, thanks to road traffic, industrial fumes, coal, wood burning, you name it. So the link between antibiotic resistance and poor air is growing stronger. With every 10% rise in air pollution, antibiotic resistance grows by 1%. It doesn't sound like much, but it is a big problem. It's one of the fastest growing threats to global health. It already affects 7 billion people. It kills more than 1 million people every year. They don't respond to antibiotics, 1 million people every year. If the air quality does not improve by 2050, about 10 million people will die annually. And apart from the human cost, there's going to be an economic cost. Costs could rise sharply, prices would rise sharply due to antibiotic-resistant infections. More and more people would live with untreated infections, and this will hurt poorer nations more. North Africa, West and South Asia face the biggest threats. And this is over and above the harm that toxic air is already causing.
You feel like you're choking when you take the face mask off. Something bad feels in the air.
The air quality has significantly deteriorated in last several years. I wish as few children as possible would use inhalers. I have been using one for years now, and each time I come to Serbia, my condition gets even worse.
Air pollution is the single largest environmental risk to public health. Again, some have it worse off than others. The Indian capital of Delhi is the most polluted city in the world. Living here reduces your lifespan by 10 years. Some other most polluted cities are in Nigeria, Peru, Bangladesh, Indonesia and Pakistan. But air pollution is a worldwide problem. For every 1,000 people alive on earth, 973 are regularly inhaling toxins. The science and evidence are clear. Air pollution causes heart disease, asthma, lung cancer, even disability and death. And it can be very harmful even for babies. Look at this data. Pollution causes premature birth of 6 million babies every year. It leads to 3 million underweight babies and 1 million stillbirths. Also the death of 500,000 newborns. The numbers are devastating. This is what toxic air is doing to our world. It harms us, the babies that are not even born yet. And now it is rendering our medicines useless. It is the breath of death. It follows us everywhere we go. There is no hiding. So about time we stopped running and try to tackle this problem. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. The Indian Space Research Organisation, or ISRO, has released images of the moon captured by Chandrayaan-3. In Australia, a space object lit up the sky above Melbourne. The Australian Space Agency said it is a remnant of a Russian Soyuz 2 rocket re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. And people usually keep dogs to chase away burglars. But what happens when the dog is irresistibly cute? A burglar in the United States faced a similar situation. He paused the burglary to sneak in a cuddle session. You have to see what happened next. And finally, what makes the 8th of August significant? On this day in 1942, the father of India, Mahatma Gandhi, launched the Quit India movement. It was a civil disobedience movement aimed to end the British rule in India. The British resorted to violent means to thwart this movement, but it initiated widespread acts of non-cooperation. We leave you with that. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
no. We don't want to do that. Alright. Because you're so cool. Come here. Because you're the coolest dog I've ever known. I love you too. You're a sweetheart. I want you to come home with me. I'm ready for that.
Somebody whose moral compass and moral responsibility is to come and tell the House what's happening in Manipur. Why is he quiet? Why has the government not been dismissed? Why is there no president rule? Why did it take him 80 days to break his silence? And who's showing him the mirror? His MLA who says this is state-sponsored violence. One of his MLAs completely paralyzed because of the violence. The Supreme Court of India, which has no faith in the government of Manipur, and the governor of Manipur saying the situation is beyond control. I have informed the higher-ups, nothing has happened. So these are the people who are talking. The reality is that it took a no-confidence motion from us, fully well knowing this is not about numbers, that maybe the Prime Minister will come and speak now. That's what parliamentary tradition is. But the leader of the House, it seems, had some more pressing, urgent matters to attend and not even be a part of the discussion that started today on something as important as Manipur, a state of India which is on fire for the last 97 days. Have you heard one appeal from the Prime Minister for peace? Have you heard one word of consolation to the people of Manipur? Parliamentarians from across party lines can go to Manipur. Rahul Gandhi can go independently to Manipur, meet the people, show faith in them. But the Prime Minister of this country can't. So no, I disagree with you. The question that needs to be asked at prime time today is, why is it that the leader of the House in the Lok Sabha, an elected Prime Minister, is escaping and running helter-skelter from Parliament? He has chosen not to show his face in either of the two houses. You don't think that's bizarre? You don't think that should be put to question?
No, I did ask Sudhanshu Trivedi exactly that question as to why did the Prime Minister not be there when the start of the debate happened.
I can't hear you.
I want to go to Sushmita. I want to go to Sushmita Dev. Sushmita Dev, the entire contention of the opposition has been that they want Mr. Modi to speak. Right? That's why you've moved to no confidence, not because Mr. Modi's government lacks the numbers, right? Now,
a very warm welcome. You're watching Breaking on News 18. I'm Akanksha Swaroop. Let's dive into this segment with the latest coming in on the no trust vote.
हिंदू सभ्यता संस्कृति में बिलीव कर रही है, इसीलिए अलौकिका पंडिता की तरह जो पूरा किताब में लिखा हुआ है कि क्या क्या करना चाहिए भारतीय नारी को, उसका पूरा का पूरा पिक्चर सोनिया जी देंगे। उनको दो काम करना है, बेटे को सेट करना है।
आज आप लोग मणिपुर का नाम लेकर के, नॉर्थ ईस्ट का नाम लेकर के बार बार जो आप लोग बोल रहे हैं, काश आप लोग 2014 के पहले के परिस्थिति को याद करते तो आपको आज नॉर्थ ईस्ट का नाम अपने जुबान पर लेने के लिए भी आपको सोचना पड़ना था।
What this parliament cannot afford is a no confidence motion against the central government, because every political party must give their constructive suggestion at the moment.
प्रधानमंत्री महोदय ने एक मौन व्रत लिया कि सदन में ना लोकसभा में कुछ बोलेंगे ना राज्यसभा में कुछ बोलेंगे, और इसीलिए अध्यक्ष महोदय ये नौबत आनी पड़ी कि हम अविश्वास प्रस्ताव के द्वारा प्रधानमंत्री मोदी जी का मौन व्रत हम तोड़ना चाहते हैं।
जुमले पे जुमला, आई लाइक अमित शाह जी, सच बोलते आपकी बात साइड से बहुत कम। ये वो या गडकरी साहब बोले थे कि ये जुमला ये गले की हड्डी हो गया, ना नीचे जा रही है ना बाहर आ रही है, दैट इज द प्रॉब्लम।
और मैं सरकार से सवाल पूछना चाहता हूँ, क्योंकि सितंबर 2020 से जब से ये सदन मिला था कोविड के बाद, आज तक इस सदन में चीन के ऊपर चर्चा नहीं। क्या ऐसा हो सकता है कि ऐसी थिएटर लेवल की इंकर्शन हो, घुसपैठ हो,
और हमारे खुफिया तंत्र को पता न लगे।
हर 3 घंटे में एक महिला का शारीरिक उत्पीड़न उत्तर प्रदेश में हो रहा है और उत्तर प्रदेश की सरकार और केंद्र की सरकार और ये डबल इंजन की सरकार इस बात का संज्ञान नहीं ले रही है।
If anybody loves India, they will oppose Modi because his government has been a government of failed promises and disastrous policy decisions.
Women and children brutally killed. Where? It is not in Manipur, sir. It is in Ahmedabad, sir. Our Prime Minister, the former Chief Minister of Gujarat, was ruling the government.
The big question remains, will the might of NDA numbers prevail? The showdown over the no trust vote has of course intensified between the centre and the opposition. The Lok Sabha session began on a stormy note with the Congress and the centre locking horns over Prime Minister not speaking inside the House over the issue of Manipur. It's been a day of all-out attacks, with the BJP asking why is Rahul Gandhi not initiating the debate, to the Congress retort over the absence of the Prime Minister on the floor of the House. Congress sources indicate that Rahul Gandhi will speak inside the Lok Sabha only in the